All right, are you ready to dive into some like seriously mind-bending philosophy today?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
So you've been exploring Advaita Vedanta,
Mm-hmm.
and you've come across this fascinating paradox. Does the world, like the one we experience every single day, does it actually just vanish for those who become spiritually enlightened?
Yeah, it's a question that has puzzled philosophers and spiritual seekers for, well, centuries, really. At the heart of it is this concept of Maya, this idea of Maya.
Okay.
Think of Maya kind of like a really dazzling, intricate illusion. It's almost like this veil that clouds our perception of what reality truly is.
So it's not that the world literally disappears,
Right.
but our perception of it changes.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a great way to put it. It's like imagine if you put on like a virtual reality headset.
Right.
The world around you, it might still exist, but what you perceive through that headset, it's completely different. And that's kind of what Advaita Vedanta is saying happens. When we achieve enlightenment, we see through that illusion, we see through the Maya, and we can finally experience reality as it truly is without that filter.
So what does reality actually look like when you remove those VR goggles, so to speak?
Ah, well, that's where things get really, really interesting.
Okay.
Advaita Vedanta talks about Brahman, and that is the ultimate reality that lies beneath the surface of everything that we perceive on a day-to-day basis. It's this idea that everything is completely interconnected, that there's this unified field of consciousness that we're all a part of.
Hold on. Are we talking about like a cosmic consciousness?
Yeah, you got it. Think about it like a vast ocean, right?
Yeah.
On the surface, you see the waves, you see the currents, you see storms, right? But deep, deep down, beneath all of that turbulence, lies this incredibly deep, still ocean floor. And that is Brahman, this unchanging, eternal reality that underlies the world of appearances, which is always changing.
Wow, that's a powerful image.
Yeah.
But if enlightenment means experiencing this unified reality,
Right.
how can someone who is enlightened, how can they still function in the world? Like, how can they order a coffee or drive a car if they're experiencing everything as this one big cosmic soup?
That's the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what this blog post that you sent me dives into. And it tackles this paradox by exploring the concept of a jīvanmukta. And that translates to literally liberated in life.
Liberated in life. So they're enlightened, but they're still here.
That's it. Yeah. Still living in the world.
How does that even work?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The blog post explores this idea through the teachings of Adi Shankaracharya, a massively influential figure, like a cornerstone in Advaita Vedanta.
Okay.
You see, some people interpret his writings to mean that the world literally disappears for the enlightened, but the author of this blog post, they challenge that whole interpretation.
So it's like we're having a debate in the debate here. We're trying to figure out if the world disappears, and now we're trying to figure out if Shankaracharya actually believed it or not.
You got it. And the author takes a very, very meticulous approach to this whole question.
Okay.
They go straight to the source. Ancient scriptures like, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, they dissect Shankaracharya's own commentaries on these texts really carefully.
It's like they're trying to crack a philosophical code.
Exactly. And they point out some really, really intriguing contradictions along the way. For example, the blog post highlights this one passage where Shankaracharya actually compares different levels of spiritual bliss.
Okay.
And get this, he does it mathematically.
He puts numbers on bliss. That's pretty wild.
It is pretty wild. I mean, we typically think of spiritual bliss as this completely abstract, impossible to describe experience. But Shankaracharya was trying to quantify it, to understand it in a very concrete way, which is so interesting.
But doesn't sound like someone who thinks that the world is totally unreal, does it?
That's the author's point. Exactly. It's if the world's a complete illusion, why even bother with math?
Yeah. That's true.
It suggests that maybe Shankaracharya actually had a more nuanced view of enlightenment, a view where the world doesn't just disappear, but our experience of it fundamentally changes.
Okay. So we've got this idea that the world is an illusion, this Maya, but it's not like a light switch. It doesn't just poof, disappear the second you reach enlightenment.
Right.
And we've got Shankaracharya, this really central figure in Advaita Vedanta, and he seems to believe that these enlightened beings, they can still experience the world, maybe even bliss, to varying degrees.
Yeah.
This is already pretty mind-blowing, to be honest.
Oh, we're just getting started. Because if these enlightened beings, these jīvanmuktas, are still experiencing the world, it just raises a whole bunch of other questions. How do they live? How do they interact with other people?
Right.
And even how do they experience suffering?
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that because I'm hooked. We're talking about people living like seemingly ordinary lives, but they might be experiencing a completely different reality.
It's a fascinating concept.
It is, yeah, absolutely.
In this blog post, it actually dives into some examples, some really fascinating examples of these potential jīvanmuktas.
Yeah.
These are revered figures from history who seem to embody this paradox of enlightenment.
Okay, like who are we talking about? Give me some names.
So the blog post, it brings up Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa
Okay.
and Sri Ramana Maharishi.
Okay.
They're both like deeply revered spiritual figures, right?
Right.
And their lives are just filled with these fascinating contradictions.
Contradictions? Like what?
Well, they both experience like this profound spiritual realization, right?
Uh-huh.
But they also went through some really intense suffering, like illness,
Wow.
loss, even moments of doubt.
Huh.
And it just raises this really interesting question.
Yeah.
Like, if they were truly enlightened, then how could they still experience suffering, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't really like compute, with this whole idea of transcending the illusion of the world, right? Like
Yeah.
I always thought enlightenment was like this get out of jail free card, get out of suffering free card.
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
But the blog post explores a few different interpretations of this.
Okay.
And this is where this whole concept of karma gets really, really interesting, right?
Right.
Remember, in Advaita Vedanta, karma, it's all about cause and effect, right?
Right.
Action and reaction.
Right.
It's this force that binds us to this cycle of birth and rebirth.
Gotcha. Yeah. Karma, like what goes around comes around.
Exactly.
Actions, consequences. But how does that relate to these jīvanmuktas, these enlightened beings who are, still seemingly experiencing suffering?
Right. Well, so the blog post suggests that maybe, just maybe,
Okay.
these jīvanmuktas weren't suffering because of their own past actions. What if they were actually taking on the suffering of others
How? Yeah.
out of compassion?
Hold on. So they were like karmic sponges or something?
Yeah.
They were just like absorbing all the bad vibes so that other people didn't have to.
It's a mind-blowing concept.
It is. It's kind of like incredibly selfless,
Yeah.
but also really hard to wrap my head around at the same time,
Yeah. Well, think about it this way, right?
Okay.
If enlightenment means that you're experiencing this really deep sense of interconnectedness,
Okay.
that you're realizing that there is no real separation between yourself and others,
Right.
then wouldn't the suffering of others naturally affect us?
I see what you're saying. Yeah. It's like that saying, right? No man is an island.
Exactly.
We're all connected, but to willingly take on suffering for others, that's a whole other level of compassion.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And it really challenges, like, our conventional understanding of what it means to be liberated, to be enlightened,
Yeah.
It's not just about escaping from our own personal suffering. It's about recognizing the suffering of others as our own.
So if these jīvanmuktas, if they're still subject to karma in this way, even if it's not, directly their own karma,
Right.
does that mean that they're still bound to this cycle of birth and rebirth? Like they're going to have to come back for another round on Earth.
Well, that's where things get, like, even more complicated.
Okay.
This blog post, like, it dives into some really, really nuanced interpretations of scripture.
Okay.
And it all kind of boils down to the role of desire.
Desire. Okay. How does desire play into all of this?
Well, you see, in Advaita Vedanta, it's not just our actions that create karma, it's also the desire behind those actions.
Okay.
Think about it.
Okay.
If you do something out of, like, pure necessity, without any attachment to the outcome, does it have the same karmic weight as something that you do with a lot of, like, selfish desire,
That's a good point. Like if I'm eating a slice of cake because I'm like genuinely hungry,
Yeah.
that's different from like, scarfing down a whole cake just because I want it,
Yeah. Exactly. It's the clinging,
Right.
it's the attachment that creates those strong karmic ties.
Okay.
And the blog post argues that for a jīvanmukta, someone who has transcended this illusion of a separate self,
Okay.
their actions are no longer driven by those same, like, ego-driven desires.
So they're acting,
Yeah.
but they're not attached to the outcome. It's almost like they're just flowing with it rather than, trying to swim upstream.
You got it.
Okay.
And because their actions aren't fueled by that same grasping, that same desire for personal gain, they don't create that same karma that binds us to the cycle of birth and rebirth, you see.
Okay, yeah, that's making a little more sense now. But if they're not driven by desire, what's motivating a jīvanmukta to act at all, you know? Like, why do anything if you're not attached to the outcome?
Right. That's where we get to the absolute heart of it all, right?
Okay.
Compassion.
Okay.
The blog post is suggesting that even though jīvanmuktas, they're free from, like, these personal desires.
Right.
They still act, but they act out of this really, really deep sense of love and interconnectedness.
Okay.
Their actions become a natural expression of that unity, like a spontaneous response to just, like, the needs of the present moment.
It's like they're acting from a place of pure being, not from, like, a place of ego.
Precisely.
Okay.
And the blog post, it even cites, like, specific scriptures to support this idea.
Okay.
Suggesting that for a jīvanmukta, actions performed without desire, they don't create new karma.
Huh.
They're acting from this beautiful place of freedom, not from a place of bondage.
That is seriously profound stuff.
Yeah, it is.
So it's not even really about whether, like, the world disappears for someone or not.
Right.
It's more about how we experience it.
Exactly.
How we act within it, you know?
Yes.
And the motivation behind our actions.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this leads to another really, really important question that the blog post tackles.
Okay.
If this kind of liberation, right, if this is even possible while you're still here, while you're still living in the world, does that change how we view our own experiences,
right,
our choices,
right,
and even our relationships?
Yeah, that's a big question.
It is a big question.
I mean, we might not be jīvanmuktas, but can we use these ideas in our own lives?
That's what we're here to explore. That's what this whole deep dive is about, right?
Okay, yeah.
And this blog post offers some really, really fascinating insights.
Okay.
It encourages us to look at the examples of people like, you know, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa,
Okay.
Sri Ramana Maharishi,
Right.
not just as these distant, like, untouchable figures, but as guides, as examples of what it might look like to live with that same kind of awareness, that same kind of compassion, even in the everyday.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about how the world might not actually disappear for these enlightened beings.
Right.
But their experience of it is fundamentally different.
Yeah.
They're still subject to, you know, the laws of karma, but they act from this place of freedom and compassion, not like ego-driven desire.
Exactly, exactly.
But what does that actually look like in practice? You know, how can we start to at least try to shift our own perspective, even if we're, you know, not enlightened beings?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a big one.
And while there's no one-size-fits-all answer, I think this blog post offers some really, really intriguing clues.
Okay.
Remember how much the author emphasizes understanding the context of these teachings.
Right.
You know, and not taking things too literally.
Yeah, like how some people take Shankaracharya's words to mean that, like, the world just vanished. But the author's saying, like, hold on a second, that might not be the whole story, right?
Right, right. And that emphasis on careful interpretation, like going beyond just the surface level of these teachings.
Okay.
That's key to actually understanding how to apply this stuff to our own lives, you know?
Okay.
It's about recognizing that Advaita Vedanta isn't just this set of intellectual concepts.
Right.
It's a practice. It's a way of being in the world. You know?
Okay, yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down. It's not just about memorizing these scriptures.
Yeah.
It's about embodying them, living them.
Yes, exactly. You got it. And one of the most powerful ways to do that is by paying attention to the why behind our actions. Remember that whole discussion about how actions driven by selfish desire, they create stronger karmic ties?
Oh, yeah, that really stuck with me.
Yeah, imagine if we could loosen the grip of those desires, right?
Right, right.
If we could learn to act from a place of greater awareness, from compassion, from understanding, that's where the real transformation begins.
So instead of just, like, going through the motions in life, we actually start paying attention to why we're doing the things we're doing.
Exactly.
We question those motivations.
Yes.
And we try to, you know, act from a place of greater awareness.
Exactly. It's about cultivating this more mindful approach to life, a way of being that's grounded in the present moment, right here, right now.
Right.
And attuned to that interconnectedness of all things.
Yeah.
As we do that, we might start to experience these little glimpses of that non-dual reality, you know,
right.
that unity that underlies all of existence, even just in our everyday lives.
That is a really powerful idea. So it's not about reaching this distant state of enlightenment. It's about these small conscious choices that we're making every single day to
Yeah.
act from a place of like greater awareness, greater compassion.
Right. You got it. It's about recognizing that even though we might feel like separate individuals, we're all part of something much, much larger than ourselves.
Right.
And by tapping into that interconnectedness, by acting from that place of love and understanding, we actually contribute to a more harmonious world around us.
Okay. I'm definitely feeling like inspired now to bring more awareness to my own actions and my own motivations.
Good.
But I gotta say, I'm still like really grappling with this whole experiencing the world without duality.
Yeah.
Like, what does that actually look like?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And while there isn't one right answer for everybody, I think this blog post really does offer some intriguing clues.
Okay.
Remember those examples of revered figures like, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa,
Yeah.
Sri Ramana Maharishi?
Yeah, the ones who like they still experience suffering even after they like achieved enlightenment.
Exactly. The post suggests that their lives, they might offer clues as to what a non-dual experience of the world could actually look like.
Right.
They lived in the world, they interacted with people,
Right.
they faced challenges, but they did it from this place of deep inner peace and understanding.
So it's not about being like immune to the ups and downs of life, but just not letting them like completely throw you off,
Exactly. It's about seeing the world and ourselves as expressions of the same unified reality as Brahman.
Okay.
And from that perspective, even suffering can be seen as like a manifestation of that unity
Wow.
rather than something to be, feared or avoided.
That's a very different way of looking at things for sure.
It is. It's radical.
Yeah.
It almost seems to like dissolve the boundaries between, good and bad, joy and sorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, in a way it does. From a non-dual perspective, those dualities, they become less rigid,
Right.
less defining. It's not that they cease to exist,
Right.
but they lose their power to
Okay.
dictate our experience.
So it's not about escaping the world, or trying to create this like perfect pain-free existence. It's about changing how we relate to the world as it already is.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the inherent perfection within the imperfection, recognizing the unity within the apparent diversity.
The author of this blog post, they make a really good point of highlighting how important it is to not interpret these scriptures as meaning that, like, the world literally disappears,
Yeah, that's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to get, really caught up
Right.
in the, intellectual gymnastics of these philosophical concepts.
For sure.
And you could lose sight of, their practical application, right?
Yeah.
The author is, reminding us that Advaita Vedanta, it's not about escaping reality,
Yeah.
It's about experiencing it more fully or
Right.
deeply.
Okay, so how do we bring this down to earth?
Yeah.
How do we start to actually experience the world without this duality in our own lives?
Right, and that's a journey that, it unfolds uniquely for each individual, right?
Right.
But the blog post does offer, some really valuable insights, I think.
Okay.
Remember our discussion about action and desire?
Yeah, how acting without those selfish desires doesn't necessarily create like new karma.
Exactly. That's, such a powerful starting point, I think.
Okay.
By becoming more aware of our motivations, by learning to act from a place of compassion and understanding, we can begin to loosen the grip of duality in our own lives.
So it's not about like forcing ourselves to be selfless or suppressing our desires completely. It's more about just being aware of like, why are we feeling this way? What's the motivation?
It's about cultivating that mindful, compassionate way of being in the world.
Right.
And as we do that, we may start to experience those glimpses of that non-dual reality,
Right.
that unity that underlies all of existence.
It's almost like a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Like by changing how we see things,
Yeah.
it impacts, the world around us.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even though we might seem like these separate individuals, we're all interconnected. We're all part of this same web of existence, right?
Right.
And recognizing that interconnectedness, that's how we start to experience the world in a whole new way.
Wow. That's really beautiful. This has been an amazing deep dive.
It has.
We've explored some, ancient scriptures. We've
Yeah.
debated different philosophical interpretations.
Oh, yeah.
We've even gotten some practical advice on how to apply this to our own lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like I have a lot to think about after this.
Me too. And that's the beauty of it all, right?
Yeah.
It's not about arriving at some final destination.
Right.
It's about the journey itself, this continual process of learning and questioning.
Right. Always learning, always growing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, to our listener, I definitely encourage you to, keep on exploring these ideas.
Yes.
See what you discover, see what insights come up as you kind of, integrate them into your own life.
That's it.
Thanks for joining us on this seriously mind-bending adventure.
It's been a pleasure.
So we're talking about experiencing the world without, labeling everything as good or bad, joyful or sorrowful.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a pretty radical way of looking at things. It makes you wonder, if those things aren't dictating our experience, then what is?
That's the beauty of it. It's not about erasing those experiences altogether, right?
Right.
They're still very much a part of life, the tapestry of life.
Okay.
But it's more about how we relate to them, Remember that image of the ocean that we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
The waves, the storms, they're still happening on the surface.
Right.
But deep down, they don't disturb the stillness of the ocean floor.
Okay. I can see how that might apply to, the jīvanmuktas, the ones who've actually, reached that state of enlightenment.
Yeah.
But what about the rest of us just kind of, wading through our messy, complicated lives?
Right.
How can we even begin to get a glimpse of that non-dual reality?
Well, the blog post, it offers a really interesting take on this. Remember how much emphasis the author put on understanding the context of all these teachings? Really, really trying not to take things too literally.
Yeah, that whole discussion about whether Shankaracharya actually believed that the world, literally disappears,
Exactly. The author's arguing that it's less about the world actually vanishing and more about a shift in perspective.
Okay.
A way of seeing through that illusion of separation.
So how do we make that shift? How do we go from seeing everything as separate, these disconnected things, to actually experiencing that interconnectedness, to experiencing that unity?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
And while there's no one-size-fits-all answer, I think the blog post offers us some clues.
Okay.
Remember that whole discussion about actions and desire?
Yeah, about how, actions that are driven by, selfish desires,
Yeah.
how those create these, really strong karmic ties.
Exactly. That's a huge clue right there.
Huh.
What if, just imagine if we could just start to loosen the grip of those desires. If we could become more aware of the why behind our actions, what if, instead of just reacting to everything around us, we hit the pause button, we reflect, we ask ourselves, why am I doing this?
Okay.
What's really motivating me right now?
So it's we're hitting the pause button on being on autopilot, and we're becoming more conscious about the choices that we're making.
Exactly. It's about cultivating that mindfulness,
Yeah.
that awareness of what's happening right here, right now, in this present moment.
Okay.
And I think as we do that, you might start to notice that your actions become less about me and mine,
Right.
and more about responding to what the situation calls for, to the needs of others,
Right.
from this genuine place of care and compassion.
Okay. Yeah, I see how that lines up with, this whole idea of experiencing the world without duality.
Right.
We're not so caught up in our own little bubbles anymore.
Exactly.
We're starting to see ourselves as part of something so much bigger.
Yes, you got it. And as we begin to actually live from that place of interconnectedness, our actions, they naturally become more harmonious.
Okay.
More aligned with the float of life,
Yeah.
And that is where we might start to experience those glimpses of non-dual reality, those moments where the boundaries between ourselves and the world around us, they kind of just dissolve a little bit.
Wow, that's really powerful. So it's not necessarily about achieving this far off state of enlightenment.
Right.
It's about cultivating that awareness, that
Yeah.
compassion, and bringing that into every single moment, every interaction.
Exactly. And the more we practice that, the more it just becomes who we are.
Yeah.
With rewiring our brains, training ourselves to see the world through a totally different lens, a lens of unity, of interconnectedness.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We've explored ancient scriptures. We've debated all these different philosophical interpretations, and we've even gotten some practical tips on how to, bring this into our everyday lives.
It's been quite the journey, hasn't it?
It really has. I feel like I have a lot to kind of unpack after this, a lot to think about.
Me too. And that's the beauty of it all, right?
Yeah.
It's not about reaching a final destination.
Right.
It's about the journey, the continual process of learning, questioning, and expanding our understanding.
Absolutely. So to our listener, we encourage you, keep diving deep, keep exploring these ideas, and just see what insights emerge, as you apply this to your own life, to your own experiences.
That's it. That's what it's all about.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible, mind-bending adventure.
It's been a pleasure.